Learning English effectively involves a combination of methods tailored to an individual's learning style, goals, and resources. Firstly, immersion is key. Surround yourself with the language as much as possible. This can be achieved by listening to English music, watching movies and TV shows in English, and reading books and articles. Additionally, practicing speaking with native speakers or fellow learners through language exchange programs can significantly improve fluency and confidence. Secondly, focusing on vocabulary and grammar is crucial. Utilize flashcards, mobile apps, and educational websites to build and test your vocabulary daily. Grammar exercises from reliable textbooks or online resources can help solidify understanding of language structures. Also, writing regularly, whether through journal entries, essays, or social media posts, helps reinforce what you've learned while improving writing skills. Engaging in English classes, either online or in person, provides structured learning and professional guidance. Classes can offer personalized feedback and clarify complex topics. Furthermore, setting clear, achievable goals, like mastering a certain number of new words weekly or achieving a specific language proficiency level, keeps motivation high. Lastly, patience and consistency are essential. Language learning is a gradual process that requires regular practice and exposure. Celebrating small victories and staying committed, even when progress seems slow, will lead to long-term success. Combining these strategies will make learning English an enjoyable and effective journey. In today's story, we'll dive into a captivating story that not only entertains but also enhances our English skills. So let's uncover the lessons hidden in each sentence together. Ariel and the Pirate School. Once upon a time, there was a boy called Mark. He was 7, and Mark had 6 sisters but no brothers, and they were really, really girly. All day long they'd play with their dolls and with their beauty salon and twirl around in their pink ballet tutus. Mark thought it was really, really boring. "How about a game of pirates?" Mark used to say every morning when they didn't have to go to school, and sometimes his sisters would agree. But their idea of playing pirates was to sit all the rogues and ruffians and cutthroats around in a circle and serve cups of tea and slices of cake. They didn't want to make people walk the plank or hunt for buried treasure or anything, and Ariel just got fed up and went to play pirates by himself. Then one day, they were all sitting at lunch when Ariel's father asked him if he wanted to go to sailing school in the summer holidays. Yeah, said Ariel. "That sounds great." And so, it was agreed. In the summer holidays, Ariel would go off to sailing school for a few days. "Just one thing, Mark," said his father. "Make sure you aren't captured by any pirates." And all his sisters laughed. "Because they might hold you to ransom for £1,000,000, said his father. "Oh, I wouldn't worry about that," said Ariel. "The rascals and ruffians could never capture me. I'd just fight them off." And he made a slashing motion with his hands, as if he was waving a cutlass through the air. See, like this, said Ariel. Boom, bam, biff. And all his sisters rolled their eyes. That's agreed then, said his father. Mark was so excited he could hardly wait for the school term to end. All day long he would sit at his desk in school, dreaming of how he was going to be out in the ocean waves, and wondering if there really were any pirates out there. Not that he'd mind if there were. He wasn't frightened of pirates. Finally, the big day arrived. It was the start of the summer holidays. Mark packed his bag very carefully. He had some clothes to wear and some sandwiches to eat, plus some swimming trunks in case he fell into the water. And a cutlass, because after all, you never knew what kind of ruffians you were going to meet on the high seas. Of course, it was only a toy, plastic cutlass. But never mind, thought Ariel. Maybe he could just scare them away by waving it around a bit. He'd show them. His mum put him on the train and told him to be careful. And as he watched the countryside go by, Ariel couldn't wait to see the ocean. Finally, he could see the waves crashing against the shore, and soon afterwards the train pulled up to the station. He climbed off the train and looked up and down the platform, and then he saw a man standing with a sign which said, "Boys who want a life on the ocean waves, please step this way." And so Mark walked towards him. "Excuse me," he said. It was at that point that he noticed a funny-looking parrot sitting on the man's shoulder. Excuse me," said Ariel. "Yes, what is it?" said the man. "Is this the right place for the sailing school?" The man paused. "Ah-ha," squawked the parrot. "Sailing school. Ah." "Shut up, you stupid bird," growled the man. Then he looked back at Mark. "Sailing school, you could say that," he said. "Step this way, young man." And so Mark followed him towards the car, and they drove to the port. "Who's a silly boy, then?" squawked the parrot, or at least he did until the man whacked him around the beak. And then they climbed out of the car, and the man showed Mark the ship. But it wasn't what Mark was expecting. It was more of a galleon than a yacht, with huge sails and rigging and a crow's nest. I mean, said Mark nervously. But the man just pushed him up the stair, so hard that Mark went flying across the deck. The next thing he knew, a very tall man was walking towards him. A man with a black cape and a wooden leg. He leant straight into Mark's face. "Welcome to pirate school, young man," he boomed. "Where will teach you everything you need to know for a life of mayhem and treachery on the high seas. I hope you like excitement, young man, because from now on, you're going to have plenty of it." "Excitement is just what I like best," said Mark. And then he felt just a tiny bit nervous. He was lying on the deck, and Captain Blackheart was leaning right over him. "Welcome to the pirate school, young man," he boomed. "I hope you like excitement, young man, because from now on, you're going to have plenty of it." "Excitement is just what I love most," said Mark, and then he felt a tiny bit frightened. "But I think I was meant to be at sailing school, not pirate school." "Sailing school?" roared Captain Blackheart, and then roared with laughter. Did you hear that my hearties? He looked around the deck, and Mark looked around as well, and all across the deck he could see about 20 pirates, and they were the worst, most desperate-looking ruffians he had ever seen. They wore striped vests and old shoes, and they had dirt all over their faces and hands. And as soon as Captain Blackheart laughed, they all laughed as well. "Sailing school, you say?" said Captain Blackheart. "Well, we'll teach you all you need to know right here, won't we, lads?" And all the pirates laughed even louder. "Our men can unfurl the rigging with one hand, cut a man down with their cutlass with the other, and fire a broadside of cannon right into the black. Cruel hearts of the enemy with their big toe. Isn't that better than any sailing school?" "Yes, sir, I suppose so," said Mark, "because sailing school is for girls." "I wouldn't want that," said Mark. "I'd much rather learn how to be a pirate." "Then let's begin, my lad," said Captain Blackheart, "and we'll make a pirate of you before the day is done. That we will." And then he picked Mark up with both hands and hurled him across the open deck of the ship. "Get yourself kitted out." Mark went hurtling across the deck, then fell down the stairs and went tumbling, 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 until he was lying flat out on the deck of the downstairs deck. "Ouch," said Mark. "That hurts." A boy was standing right next to him. He looked about 9 to Mark, and he was dressed in old rags, and his face was covered in dirt. "Hurt, did it?" said the boy. "No, no," said Mark, climbing to his feet. Just then, the boy clipped him around the head, and Mark fell over again. "That's all right, then." The boy put out a hand. "My name's Ben. I'm the cabin boy around here." He looked Mark up and down. "You can't wear that stuff," he said. "We'll get you some proper clothes." And Ben walked across to a big chest. He pushed aside a snake that just happened to be sitting on top of it and pushed it open. "Here, takes your pick," he said. Inside the chest, there was a collection of the dirtiest, oil-est, meanest-looking rags you had ever seen. Mark pulled out an old, battered pair of trousers and a stripped vest and pulled them on. Then he messed up his hair a bit and spread some grime across his face. It was just the sort of thing that made his mum really cross. "I'm going to enjoy being a pirate," he thought to himself. "There's just one thing," he thought. "I better tell Mum and Dad I'm not at the sailing school." So he walked up onto the deck until he saw Captain Blackheart. He was standing at the wheel of the ship with the parrot at his shoulder. "Ah, Mark, me lad, you look like a regular ruffian," said Captain Blackheart. "Thanks, sir," he said, "but I just wanted to tell my mum and dad I'm at pirate school, not sailing school." And suddenly Captain Blackheart looked very cross, and the whole ship went silent, so that all Mark could hear was the rustling of the wind through the sails. All the pirates were edging close towards him until Mark was completely surrounded. "We don't tell parents that anyone is at pirate school," he said, in a voice so menacing it sent a shiver down Mark's spine. And then he roared with laughter, and all the pirates laughed with him. Even Ben was laughing. "Because you're a prisoner," roared Captain Blackheart. "A prisoner," said Mark. "Oh, "You're not scared, are you, Mark?" said Captain Blackheart. "Me, scared," said Mark, just a little nervously. "Nah. Just in case you can't quite remember what happened so far, Mark was a boy of 7 who went off to sailing school one summer. But there was a bit of a mix-up, and Mark found himself at pirate school instead. He'd been dressed in old rags by the cabin boy Ben, but when he asked to tell his mum and dad where he was, it turned out he'd been taken prisoner. "We don't tell parents that anyone is at pirate school," said Captain Blackheart, in a voice so menacing it sent a shiver down Mark's spine. And then he roared with laughter, and all the pirates laughed with him. Even Ben was laughing. "Because you're a prisoner!" roared Captain Blackheart. "A prisoner," said Mark. "Oh, you're not scared, are you, Mark?" said Captain Blackheart. "Me? Scared," said Mark, just a little nervously. "Nah. Well, that's good then, me hearty, because there's no room for scaredy cats on this pirate ship." And saying that, Captain Blackheart waved his rusty hook through the air. "All the men on his ship have left their families behind many years ago, and they all joined us as boys," the captain continued. He pointed to the rogues and ruffians lined up on the deck. "How many years since you saw your family, Black Spot?" An ugly-looking ruffian with a giant black spot on his face stepped forward. "I reckon it be 20 years, Captain." "And how about you, One Leg?" A vicious-looking rascal with a stump where his leg should be stepped forward. "At least 50 years, Captain," he said. "And you, Razor? What about you?" And a pirate with the biggest nose that Mark had ever seen stepped forwards. "At least 100 years, Captain." "So, you see, lad, when you sign up with Captain Blackheart's pirate ship, you leave your family behind. Forever. But we'd all rather sail the 7 seas with Captain Blackheart," cried the pirates with one voice. "And so would I," said Mark. Except really, he wasn't so sure, because 100 years at sea seemed an awfully long time. Still, never mind, he thought. It looks like great fun. More fun than playing with his silly and soppy 6 sisters back at home, anyway. "So how do I start being a pirate, sir?" asked Mark. Captain Blackheart scratched his chin with his rusty metal hook and thought for a moment. "You could start with the climbing of the rigging," he said. "Or we could put you on crow's nest duty. Or maybe even a small lesson in how to set up a plank so that any dastardly villains we come across can be made to walk it." "Cripes, that sounds like fun." "Indeed it does, my lad," said Captain Blackheart. "Then again, we could teach you how to fire a broadside or practice sharpening your cutlass." "Or raising the Jolly Roger," said Mark. "Aye, that and all, lad," said the captain. "But first you'll help Ben here make some lunch." And so Mark followed Ben down into the galley of the ship. It had been a long, long morning so far, and Mark was feeling a bit puckish. I wonder what pirates have for lunch. Though Mark. At school, they usually had chicken and chips, or spag bowl, or else fish fingers and beans. And there was often ice cream and apple crumble for pudding. And Mark usually polished it all off, and his sister's lunch as well, if there was any left. I bet pirate grub is fantastic, he decided. Okay, said Ben. You get the jellied sheep's eyes and I'll slice up the snake. Mark felt a bit queasy all of a sudden, and a lot less hungry. You do like sheep's eyes, don't you? Said Ben. And snake? Well, or if you prefer, we can move straight on to the stewed worms, or the bug burger. Right, Mark felt his skin go a little green. I hope you're not one of those landlubbers who just likes bacon and sausages and fish fingers and all that type of grub, said Ben. Because here on the pirate ship we eat sheep's eyes and worms and bugs and everything. Right, said Mark. Sounds great. And so they started on lunch. They tossed the sliced worms, the chopped bug burgers, the sheep's eyes, and the snake into a big pot, and they stirred and stirred until a big stew was ready, and then carried it up onto the deck. Captain Blackheart's ship was a long way out to sea now, and Mark couldn't see any land at all. Whichever way you looked, there was just sea, sea, and more sea, and a fierce wind was starting to blow, making the ship rock from side to side, and there were big waves starting to splash across everyone. Ben put the bowl of stew down on the center of the deck, and all the pirates lined up with their tin plates. Ben scooped out a big spoonful of stew into each one, and they gobbled it all up. Here's yours, said Ben, putting a big pile of stew on Mark's plate. It smelled horrible, like a pile of old socks and football jerseys, and as the wind blew, the ship rocked from side to side, and Mark began to feel a bit sick. Don't waste it, lad, said Captain Blackheart. Ariel took one small bite, and it was the most horrible thing he'd ever tasted, even worse than Granny's beef stew, and that was so bad all his sisters had had to lie down after eating it. I said don't waste it, lad, said Captain Blackheart, waving his hook at Mark. Mark tried another bite, but spat it out. Is it the sheep's eyes or the sliced worm you don't like, lad? Said Captain Blackheart. I put in some shark tongue, said Ben. Maybe he doesn't like that. And at that moment, Mark felt so queasy, he ran to the side of the ship and was violently sick. When he walked back, the captain was looking very serious indeed. I don't think this lad's up for a life on the ocean, he said. I reckon we'll put him up for ransom. For ransom? Cried Mark. Aye, lad, said Captain Blackheart. I reckon your parents will pay a pretty penny to get you back. Better that than see you walk the plank. Just in case you can't quite remember what happened so far, Mark was a boy of 7 who went off to sailing school one summer. But there was a bit of a mix-up, and Mark found himself at pirate school instead. But the lunch they made was so disgusting, Mark was sick, and Captain Blackheart decided to put him up for ransom. Now, I'll begin. For ransom, cried Mark. Aye, lad, said Captain Blackheart. I reckon your parents will pay a pretty penny to get you back. Better that than see you walk the plank. Walk the plank, cried Mark. Well, of course, said Ben the cabin boy. Anyone doesn't pay the ransom, we make them walk the plank. But don't worry, The sharks will eat you in no time." Mark felt even queasier after that. "Black Spot," cried Captain Blackheart. "Bring me that parrot." Mark watched while the ugly-looking pirate called Black Spot walked across that deck. On his shoulder, there was the very same parrot who he had seen at the railway station. "Walk the plank, squawked the parrot. "Shut up, you stupid bird," growled Black Spot. From his overcoat, Captain Blackheart pulled out a piece of parchment and a bottle of ink. He grabbed hold of the parrot, plucked out a feather, and dipped it into the ink. "Ouch, that hurt," screeched the parrot. "One more squawk out of you, bird, and you'll be going in the stew," snarled Captain Blackheart. "Big meanie." "What was that?" "I said, which stew?" squawked the parrot. "Shut up," yelled Captain Blackheart. Then he looked at Ben, handed him the feather, and told him to start writing. Because Ben, it turned out, was the only person on the ship who could read and write, even though he was only the cabin boy. Captain Blackheart scratched his chin with his hook and tried to think. "To Mark's parents," he began, and then he looked at Ben. "Are you writing this down?" "Yes, sir," said Ben. "Very well," said Captain Blackheart. "To Mark's parents, allow me the honor of introducing myself. My name is Captain Blackheart, the meanest, cruelest, black-hearted ruffian of the 7 seas and the 5 oceans, and I am honored, sir, to make your acquaintance. Into my possession has fallen a boy called Mark, whom I believe is your son, although you must be ashamed of the lily-livered little landlubber, and I could hardly blame you for disowning the cowardly wretch completely. On first acquiring the said boy, my plan was to enroll Mark in my pirate school. I'd have taught him all the skills he needed for a life of mayhem, skullduggery, and piracy on the high seas. And yet, on the first day here, he has been sick. He doesn't like the food, and he doesn't care much for the waves either. In short, I am forced to conclude that he is nothing but a lily-livered landlubber. Therefore, I have no use for him. I will return him to you for a ransom of £1,000,000, paid in gold bullion or treasure. If we have not received the money in 7 days, then Mark will be forced to walk the plank, and you will never see him again. Yours in dastardly anticipation, Captain Blackheart. So if you happen to have a spare treasure map, please send that as well." The captain rested for a moment. "Have you got that, lad?" he said, looking towards Ben. "Indeed I have, Captain," said Ben. But, started Mark. "Be quiet," growled Captain Blackheart. "Be quiet, be quiet, be quiet," squawked the parrot. "Silence," roared Captain Blackheart. He folded up the letter, pressed a seal of a skull and crossbones into it, and handed it across to the parrot. "Now, deliver that to Mark's parents, you useless bird," he said, and the parrot flapped his wings and flew away. Oh no, though Mark, as Ben led him down to galley. "What's Dad going to say when he gets that? I'm in trouble now." The wind was blowing hard, and the ship was rocking from side to side. Mark lay down in the hammock in the cabin. He suddenly remembered what Dad had said to him about not being captured by pirates while he was away at pirate school. And Mark had said not to worry. He'd just fight them off with his cutlass. Oh no, thought Mark. Maybe I shouldn't have said that. Now they are going to make me walk the plank, and the sharks will eat me. Now it took the parrot quite a long time to fly all the way to Mark's house. That's partly because a storm was bowing across the ocean, and partly because he wasn't a very fast parrot, but mainly because he kept stopping for little snacks along the way. Still, finally, he got there, and when the parrot arrived, he could see Mark's 6 sisters, and they had just organized a tea party for their dolls in the garden. The parrot dropped down to the ground with the letter in its beak, and all the sisters flapped around, shouting and shrieking. "I'm looking for Mark's dad," said the parrot. And whilst he was at it, he grabbed a bit of the doll's cake and ate it all up. One of the little girls rushed inside, shouting, "Dad! Dad! There's a parrot here to see you." But Mark's dad thought it was just a joke. Eventually, he came outside and saw a slightly podgy-looking parrot polishing off its 3rd helping of cake. And there was a letter at its side. He picked up the letter and started to read. He frowned and scratched his head, and then he started to laugh. "It says Mark's been captured by pirates and is being held to ransom," he said. "Oh, that's just Mark with his silly pirate games," said one of the sisters. "Remember, he said he'd fight them off with his plastic cutlass," said another. "You are quite right," Mark's dad decided, and he sat down to write a reply. "Dear Captain Blackheart," he began. "I too am honored to make your acquaintance, dear sir. My son Mark, far from being a lily-livered landlubber, is the bravest boy who ever sailed the 7 seas. He assured me personally before he left that if he was captured by pirates, he would fight the rascals off with his cutlass. No force on earth can keep him prisoner, and certainly not the cowardly Captain Blackheart. Your faithful servant, Mark's dad. P.S. Your parrot has eaten all my cake." And when he was finished, he handed the letter across to the parrot. "Now take that back to the captain, Fatso Bird," he said, "and don't delay." The parrot flapped its wings, but was finding it quite hard to fly on account of all the cake he had just eaten. He flew across the land and then over the sea, until finally he landed on Captain Blackheart's pirate ship. "Aha!" cried the captain. "So you've returned, my pretty bird. Let's us see how soon that stupid boy's father plans to pay us our treasure." Mark was already hard at work scrubbing the floor of the ship. He watched as Captain Blackheart handed the letter to Ben, because he was the only person who could read. And Ben started to read. "Dear Captain Blackheart," he began, "I too am honored to make your acquaintance, dear sir. My son Mark, far from being a lily-livered landlubber, is the bravest boy who ever sailed the 7 seas. He assured me personally before he left that if he was captured by pirates, he would fight the rascals off with his cutlass." Oh no, thought Mark. I was only joking. And he could see Captain Blackheart growing redder and redder and redder as if he was about to explode. No force on earth can keep him prisoner, and certainly not the cowardly Captain Blackheart, continued Ben. Your faithful servant, Mark's dad. There was a silence on board the ship. All the pirates were standing still, looking at the deck, and all you could hear was the rustling of the wind in the sails, whilst Captain Blackheart turned red, then green, then purple. "Prepare the plank!" he roared suddenly, and he looked at Mark. "Your father has gravely insulted this ship, sir," he snarled, "and 1 week from today you will walk the plank." Captain Blackheart looked at Mark. "Your father has gravely insulted this ship, sir," he snarled, "and 1 week from today you will walk the plank." Mark felt a bit nervous after he heard that. "Take him to the hold," roared Captain Blackheart. Ben, the cabin boy, led Mark down into the hold. "Well, looks like it's the plank for you, old boy," said Ben. "Rotten luck." "I know," said Mark glumly. "Still, I suppose it'll be quick," said Ben. "A couple of bites from the shark and you'll be dead. Or maybe a giant octopus will strangle you. Or you could be eaten by a whale. Or else just drown, I suppose." Mark gulped. "Still, a bit means of your old man not to stump up the ransom," said Ben. "You see, the thing is, I always told stories and jokes about how I'd fight off the pirates," said Mark. "So I think he thought I was just messing around." "You mean you don't want to walk the plank?" said Ben. "I'd rather not," said Mark. Ben thought for a minute. "Then I suppose there's nothing else for it," he said. "We need a plan." And so the two boys sat down together, and they thought, and they thought, and they thought, until their heads hurt a bit. So they had a snack, and then they thought a bit more, and finally they came up with a brilliant wizard plan. But it was so clever that they decided not to tell anyone about it. For the next week, Mark worked really hard. He scrubbed the decks, he tightened the rigging, and he helped Ben cook all the horrible food down in the hold. And he soon found he was starting to quite enjoy life at pirate school. One of the men showed him how to man the crow's nest, another showed him how to slash a cutlass, and another taught him how to fire a broadside of cannon. It was all great fun. Even Captain Blackheart was starting to quite like Mark. "If you were such a lily-livered landlubber, my lad, I'd probably show you how to follow a buried treasure map," he said, ruffling Mark's hair with his rusty hook. "But as it is, I'll send you to a watery grave." Finally, 7 days were up. After the pirates had finished their breakfast of dried shark skin and boiled octopus's eyes, Captain Blackheart took to the deck. "7 days have passed since we placed a ransom on Mark's head," he roared, "and still Mark's dad hasn't paid the money we demanded." He looked across at the parrot who was in charge of all communications on board the ship. "Any word, bird?" "Not a whisper, Captain," squawked the parrot. "They can't like him very much." "Then prepare the plank, men," said Captain Blackheart. And all the pirates roared with laughter, because although they had been nice to Mark, and quite liked him really, They were still mean-hearted ruffians, and they really enjoyed making someone walk the plank. Mark slipped downstairs with Ben. "All ready?" Mark gulped. "I think so." Ben gave him a sheep's bladder from the larder, which Mark stuffed under his jumper, and then he gave him a straw. "Then let's go," said Ben. They climbed back up on deck. The walking of the plank was scheduled for noon, because that's when the captain said the sharks liked their lunch. Mark walked up to the parrot. He stayed very quiet, then pulled one of its feathers out. "Aw, cack," screeched the parrot. And the noise was so huge, all the pirates crowded around to see what was happening. And while they were doing that, Ben slipped up to the captain's deck and reset the ship's wheel so that it would be sailing steadily towards shore. "Sorry about that, Bird," said Mark. "He should be punished for that," squawked the parrot. "Well, I suppose I should," said Mark, "but since I'm being made to walk the plank at noon, I'm not really bothered." And all the rascals and ruffians laughed, even Captain Blackheart. 2 more hours passed. Mark chatted to the pirates and picked up a few more tips on how to sharpen your cutlass, and they were all impressed by how brave he was. Finally, noon approached. "Prepare the plank," said Captain Blackheart. Jim stood up. He felt a bit nervous now, because although they had a plan, he couldn't be sure if it would work or not. The plank was stretched out from the side of the ship, and all the pirates drew their cutlasses and pointed them at Mark. "Walk, lad," said Captain Blackheart. Mark started to walk nervously along the plank. It was very wobbly, and he could see the waves down below. But just a little way ahead, he could see land, because Ben had reset the course of the ship to bring it close to the harbor. Mark walked and walked and walked. Then, splash! He was in the water. He could feel himself sinking, and the water closing above his head. But then he reached for straw. He pushed it into the sheep's bladder and blew and blew and blew, and it inflated into a balloon. Mark grabbed hold of it and kicked his legs, and soon he was swimming towards shore. As he glanced behind, he could see the ship sailing away, and the pirates were cheering his death. "Ha! Fooled then," said Mark. And very soon he was back on dry land. As it happened, all the boys were coming out of the sailing school he had meant to go to, and so he joined them and went back home by the first train. And that evening he was safely reunited with his family. "Good to see you," said his dad, ruffling his hair. "Glad to see you escape those pirates without costing me a fortune in ransom money." "Well, yes," said Mark excitedly. "But I had to walk the plank and... But all his 6 sisters were already laughing. There goes Mark with his silly pirate stories again. But as he went to bed that night, Mark knew it was all true, and he wondered if he'd ever see the pirate school again. One day, he thought, just maybe. As our story ends, we hope you've enjoyed the journey and learned some valuable new English vocabulary. Remember, Every story is an opportunity to enhance your language skills. So revisit this video to reinforce the terms we've explored today. We encourage you to practice using these new words in your own sentences and share your examples in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to join us for more engaging English lessons. Thank you for watching, and we look forward to seeing you in our next story adventure.